Literally putting everyone before you will kill your soul. And I know this from firsthand experience. And this is exactly what I want to talk to you guys about. Now, if you're new here, welcome to my channel. My name is Ashley, and this is where I share all of my life lessons in hopes that it could potentially help someone somewhere. Now, all my life, I've always been told that I give really good advice. I'm also a Capricorn. I have Capricorn stellium. I have ninth house stellium as well, ninth house energy. So there's definitely a lot of life lessons that I've had to go through in my life that have taught me incredible lessons. There has been quite a lot of trauma, so I definitely have some information to share with you guys. Now, in today's video, I do want to talk about how putting yourself last, putting other people in front of you before you, essentially being a people pleaser will kill your soul. And I also want to talk about, what I learned from it, how I managed to stop doing that and finally start putting myself first. Now, disclaimer though, I will say that I am still a work in progress. I'm not perfect. I don't think anyone else is perfect, but there are people out there that are further ahead in their journey, and whatever they've learned about at that current state is definitely something that they can help pass on or pay it forward to other people. Now, where do I want to start? So I would say that my journey with being a people pleaser came from my childhood. Now, I do have notes here, so I'm going to be looking up and down a little bit because I want to make sure I get everything in for you guys. Now, I do come from an immigrant family. I was the first generation to be born in Canada. So I was caught in the middle of two different cultures, of two different sets of, beliefs. So being born into an immigrant family, especially a Latin family, you are expected to put everyone else in front of you, put everyone else before you, especially as a woman. And I was the firstborn, so there was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure put on me to be the example, to be the leader of the family, because there was not a boy that was born first. All of that pressure, all of that responsibility was placed on me. Not to mention that being a girl, there was also a certain level of expectation that I still needed to be feminine. I still needed to be soft. I needed to be nurturer. I needed to be a caretaker. So essentially, I had to learn how to be a provider, but I also needed to learn how to be a nurturer and a caretaker from the very beginning. And unfortunately, while I now understand that my parents, my family just didn't know any better, this is where they came from, this is what they were taught. Unfortunately, this was a big player in me suffering and me having that downfall, I guess, or being set up for failure. Now, I don't want to put a lot of negativity or a lot of emphasis in how they raised me, because I have forgiven them for what happened. And I'm sure a lot of other people, especially if you're watching this video, you can relate to that. Your parents didn't know any better. They have their own problems. They had their own traumas that they were trying to work through. But growing up, it was not easy. You're constantly taught that the family's needs come first, that you are at the bottom of that scale, that you need to make sure your parents are taken care of, especially if you have siblings. You need to make sure that your younger siblings are also taken care of. And when it comes to building a future for yourself, you have to pick something that doesn't necessarily align with your passions, with what you are instinctively or naturally gifted with. Your career has to be something that is going to be able to provide not just for you, but for the entire family. So, for example, anything in the arts, anything that was too risky, anything that was deemed as not being a doctor, lawyer, engineer kind of thing was usually frowned upon, which then meant that not only were my interests or my, myself as a person. Not only was that put at the bottom, but now what I truly wanted to do with my life was also put at the bottom. I remember when I was younger, I wanted to be an archaeologist. I really, really wanted to do that. But at the time, I didn't fully understand how it was possible to do that, because the only program that offered, or the only school that offered that in the country, was on the complete other side of the country. And when I told my family about this, I was kind of met with a lot of hostility, a lot of, that's not really possible. How are you going to move across the country? We can't afford to sit. Like, basically every excuse you could think of for me to pick a school in the same city where I was living, even if it didn't align with what I wanted to do. And so that kind of confused me a lot. I picked something that I thought made sense. It wasn't something that I was genuinely interested in. I picked something to pick something and to hopefully keep my parents happy. But what I didn't understand at the time is that this was going to cause a lot more confusion for me. It was going to make me feel lost, like I wasn't listening to myself, like I didn't even know myself, because what my heart was telling me to do was the complete opposite of what I ended up choosing. So that taught me to not listen to myself, to not understand who I was in order to keep those around me happy. Not only that, it also told me that what I wanted, what my desires or my dreams were not worthy enough in the eyes of the people whose opinion I valued the most. And that was probably one of the hardest things for me to overcome, because I'm sure a lot of people relate to this. You want your parents' approval, but when you don't get it, you're often taught that you need to do something else. You need to do something more. It's conditional. And this is something that was kind of put into me from the very beginning. If I wasn't smart enough, if I wasn't fast enough, if I wasn't the best, if I didn't do enough at home, I was kind of deemed as unworthy. And the love I received was extremely conditional. It was only based on whether or not I had performed to a level that was satisfactory to them. And as I grew up, this also translated into other areas of my life, especially in relationships. It also translated into my career. When it came to work, I always felt like if I was not hyper productive, if I was not always doing something, I was not worthy, or I was not doing my best. And then when it came to relationships, I always felt like I had to constantly go above and beyond. Like I always had to walk on eggshells to make sure I was making sure that person's needs were always met. But on the inside, it was really just brewing a lot of resentment and a lot of anger, because I constantly felt like whatever I wanted, my needs, my wishes, my goals were never being met. And I didn't recognize that this was the root cause until much later. But during that time, I just got extremely angry. I was very unhappy, and it was showing. I was just constantly moody. I was depressed a lot, and I did not understand why. But I guess you can say that's where the saying "you cannot pour from an empty cup" comes from, because it wasn't until I was probably in my late 20s that I fully understood that message. I always thought that you could give because I had been used to giving constantly, even though I was running on empty. It just meant that I had to push. I kind of took it as a badge of honor, where I felt like I had this resilience in me that always pushed me forward, that it meant that I could always push the boundaries and continue going and going no matter what was thrown in front of me, because I had to. I had no choice. Other people were depending on me. But in reality, I was just completely burning myself out. Pouring from an empty cup meant that I was wasting away. I was losing my soul. I was losing my heart, my energy. And I was not taking care of myself the way I wanted to, or the way I saw other people around me doing. Other people were pursuing their goals, their dreams, while I was here trying to make sure that the immediate circle around me was constantly happy and giving me that validation that I was craving. When in reality, I realized that pouring from an empty cup is the opposite of what you should be doing. You should be prioritizing yourself first and filling up your cup, filling yourself up with good energy, positivity, abundance. And from there, you are able to give to others because you are just, your cup is flowing, overflowing. So you have plenty of give. You have plenty to give without having to worry as to whether or not you're going to have any left at all. Now, all of this, how did it affect me negatively? Well, one of the things that I could tell you a little bit more about is that I really did lose myself. It was kind of like how I was explaining earlier. I felt like I didn't know myself. I felt like I had no personality. I felt like, I don't want to say this is what it was, but it kind of felt like pick me energy. And I didn't realize that's what it was until much later. It just always felt like I had to do good, or I had to fit the ideal version of everyone else's perspective in order for me to feel happy. And this translated into so many different areas. Like I was saying, my education, my career, relationships, friendships. I was always behaving in a way that wasn't authentic to me. And I really just wanted to make sure everyone else around me was happy. But what I noticed is that because I was not acting authentic, I was not being true to myself, even though I would go above and beyond for people, oftentimes it was, thrown back at me, or it was not appreciated, it was manipulated, it was overlooked. And I would later, much later in life, learn that when you're not being your authentic self, you're not going to get what it is that you're seeking. You are literally going to get the opposite of that, because you're giving out that needy, desperate energy. You want this validation so bad, you're going to get the opposite of it, when in fact what you should be doing is being your authentic self. Even if that means saying no to people, even if that means disappointing people, being your authentic self, staying true to who you are, will get you a lot further in life than constantly wearing yourself out and looking for that approval or validation from external sources. Now, this goes back to, honestly, manifestation, and it goes back to your self-concept. You need to know who you are. Everything in your reality starts inside of your mind. It starts with your identity, and from there, it'll project everything on the outside based on who you have convinced yourself that you are, which makes total sense to me now that I look back on it. I was definitely in the mindset of victimization, or constantly being overlooked, a lot of insecurity. And it took me a while to realize that all of that was being reflected towards me because of that poor self-concept that I had. So now I want to go into talking about how I was able to overcome this. Now, this did take a lot of effort for me. This was super difficult for me to do because I was not used to it. And I'm sure a lot of you are in the same situation. How do you go from constantly being a people pleaser, being a doormat, always saying yes to people, making sure everyone else is happy, to literally becoming selfish and putting yourself first? It feels very unnatural, and it kind of feels like you have imposter syndrome. And sometimes when you're putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation, it can be so uncomfortable that you just retreat back to what it is that you were doing before, not because you necessarily want to, but because it's comfortable. It's something that you recognize. A lot of people would rather live in survival mode because they know how to do it than to thrive through challenges or putting themselves in new situations that don't require survival simply because they don't know how to maneuver it. They don't know what to expect. So the first thing I did, I started out small. And I think this is important for you guys to also understand. You need to start out small, baby steps. It's okay. The first thing I started to do was say no more often. If I knew I couldn't do something, if I couldn't take someone's shift at work, if I was too tired to go out with friends that day, if my parents wanted me to do 101 things at the house, sometimes you have to say no. I would tell people, I'm too busy. I'm sorry, I really want to go, but I'm too tired. I'm too busy. When it came to my parents, I would tell them I did as much as I could. I do have other things I need to do, especially with work or with school at the time. I did what I could. The rest, I can do at another time, at another date. I prioritized what was important, and I just hoped that they would understand. Now, not everyone is always going to understand, and that's okay, but you do need to prepare yourself for it. The people that do not understand, you do not need in your life. The people that do not understand are usually very narcissistic types of people, and they will be the first ones to tell you about their disapproval or their unhappiness about you prioritizing yourself. And this is something that you need to pay attention to. These are the people that you immediately need to start working towards cutting off. If you're the type of person that struggles with cutting people off right away, that's okay. You can just do it in steps. You can phase them out. If you're comfortable cutting people off without any sort of explanation, more power to you. That's kind of what I did with certain people. As soon as I realized that these people were only happy with me whenever I would say yes to them or would help them with whatever they needed, they automatically became very vocal about how I was changing, how I was selfish, how sometimes they would just even ghost me first. And this was because I was no longer useful to them. And certain people, once you are no longer useful to them, they will remove you. They don't need to spend time or energy on someone that doesn't serve them. And it sucks. I won't lie to you guys. It really does suck, because sometimes you think that certain people are your friends, certain people are going to be there for you, when in reality, they've just been using you the entire time because you've allowed them to. But when you start saying no and you start standing up for yourself, you start prioritizing yourself, these people will reveal themselves. And what you do with that information is completely up to you. Now, the next thing I did was I started prioritizing my self-care. I started taking care of myself more often. And this meant, little things. For me, it meant prioritizing my skincare. I wanted to have really nice skin. I wanted to take care of my health. I wanted to go to the gym more often. So I hired a personal trainer because I wanted to prioritize my health, my body, my physical fitness. I also wanted to prioritize my diet. So this meant not always eating whatever my family was eating at home. I needed to prioritize myself, and unfortunately that meant having to make my own meals, even if that would kind of upset them, because they would make all this food and I would not eat it, even though the rest of the family would. I would have to go make my own meal, and sometimes that can be seen as rude. Now, another thing that I did that I found that really helped me overcome all of this was spending time by myself. And this was something that I was not used to because I was around a lot of other people. I wanted to be accepted so badly, but I started spending more time by myself. And one of the things that helped me tremendously was going to bookstores. And I would spend an hour, sometimes even 2 hours before my shift at work, just going to a bookstore nearby, going through the different areas, especially the ones that had to do with self-help, self-development, psychology, spirituality. I would go through all of the books and pick up different ones that seemed interesting. Sometimes I would read a few pages. I would just I would just spend some time here by myself getting to know what my interests were. And one of the ways I did that was through my interests in books. Whatever I was gravitating towards, I realized that this is something that was interesting to me. And so from there, I slowly started to get to know what my personality was and who I was at the core without all of that outside noise. Now, the next thing I did, now this was when I was ready to take a bigger step, and that was finally moving away from my hometown. I moved to a much bigger city, and that was my first time away from home. It was my first time not living at home. So it was definitely a very big leap for me. But at that point, people around me had started getting used to me prioritizing myself and my needs, and I was able to make that jump. It was quite scary. I won't lie to you guys. It was pretty scary because I had never done anything like that. Didn't really know anyone there. I think I maybe knew one or two people in the city, but it was definitely something that I needed to do. So what happened after all of this? After I felt much more comfortable with prioritizing myself, after I had moved to this new city, I felt a tremendous amount of peace, especially when I was alone. I realized that I did not need external validation. I did not need to be around fake social circles. I did not need to overexert myself in order to feel good about myself. I realized that whenever I was truly interested in something and really wanted to pursue a certain project or a certain career, the inspiration or the motivation just came naturally. I didn't have to overexert myself in order to get to that validation, to that feeling of feeling good because I did something good. It just came naturally when I started acting from my authenticity. And it also gave me a lot of time to think about how these other people would have acted if they had done the same thing I did, especially those that were full-on narcissists. If I had called out any of these people for putting themselves first, they for sure would have told me that I was being crazy. They would have gaslit me 1000%. They probably would have told me that it's none of my business. And then I also thought about how these people would have reacted if I needed help from them, if I needed a favor, if I needed them to put me first. And that's when I quickly realized that none of these people would ever put me first because it just was not wired into them. They had gotten so used to me putting myself there for them that that was just the expectation. And if the tables were ever turned, these people would not be there for me. And that's exactly what ended up happening. Sorry, my battery actually died, so I had to quickly change that. So slightly different setting here. But I wanted to continue with a few more points before I conclude this video. And those are signs of overcorrection. Now, when we are changing and we're making these radical shifts and changes in our lives, sometimes we can go so hard because we're craving that change. We're so desperate to make a significant impact in our life that sometimes we overcorrect. And we don't realize that's happening because we usually think that this is what we need to do. This is normal. We're trying to 100% commit to this new version of ourselves. And one of the things I was guilty of was overcorrecting. And that meant, for me, it looked different than it might look for you. But for me, when I started prioritizing myself, I became very ruthless. I noticed that I was not very forgiving towards people. I cut people off very quickly. I would not even give people a chance. As soon as I felt slightly disrespected, I would cut people off, or I wouldn't even bother hearing people out. I noticed that my tolerance or my patience was very minimal. I just didn't feel like I needed to give people more than half an inch, let's say, as an example. I just felt like I was always on guard and I needed to protect myself at all costs. So the second anything or anyone felt off, it was an immediate cut off for me. Now, I do realize that this was a little bit aggressive. I would not be this hardcore. If I could do it all over again, I would be a little bit more mindful. I would probably try to give some people the benefit of the doubt, not everyone, but I would be a little bit softer about it. I would hear out situations a little bit more. But that's all stuff that comes with experience. That's all stuff that comes with age. So I guess that's an example as to how I'm not perfect. I'm still learning, but I do want to be able to share these lessons with all of you guys. I'm still trying really hard to figure out how things work, what works best, what works doesn't. And it's the same for everyone. We're all still unfolding our journey. And the best thing we can do is just share what we've learned along the way in hopes that certain people will resonate with it. Now, don't forget to always give yourself some grace, forgive yourself. You are learning things for the first time. Some of us have never had anyone to teach us about our self-respect, about valuing ourselves. We have to learn this on our own, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer than we would have liked. Sometimes it takes longer than our peers, simply because we didn't have the resources. We didn't have someone to teach us these things. But the important thing is that you are teaching it to yourself. You are learning it. You are becoming a better person. You're improving yourself. So that's all that matters. All right, I think that's it for today's video. Thank you guys for sitting with me, having a little bit of a chat, having a coffee with me. And I hope this helped some of you guys. I will see you in the next video.